Unloved. Krista Green Paradise 332C never heard her husband tell her that he loved her. She never heard him say anything in any language she could understand. They communicated exclusively through visor translation. NMITY provided functions that generated instant voice-to-synthetic speech translation of any known languages, even some that were no longer spoken. She hated the system voices. They made her husband sound slow and cold, like a dead voice from beyond the grave. So she read his translation from her visor only as text. Like subtitles for a foreign film, the warmth and shape of his voice filled those dead letters of the text with his life. The machine just gave them meaning.
I feel significant fondness for you.
That was as close as it ever got. It turns out their native languages were as far apart on all linguistic scales as any two forms of communication could be. The assembly language of her visor software was probably more compatible. But she didn't love software, she loved this man. His voice was actually quite beautiful, and when they first met, she loved to listen to him speak without any translation. His general meaning and honest, gentle intent were obvious to her. For years they promised they would learn each other's languages and communicate directly with no machine interference. As the days went by, they settled into a linguistic stalemate. Neither of them wanted to give up the ability to express themselves or be reduced to that helpless, childlike state of simple, feeble communication. The visor translation became good enough. Its clumsy, cold and probably wildly inaccurate conversion of their words created this wall between them, but hopefully also allowed them to share their feelings just enough to maintain their connection. But recently she was really beginning to doubt that things were working between them. The cold, loveless words that they shared began wearing away that original feeling of gentle warmth and caring and replaced it with icy obligation and expected responses. What should have been words of love sounded like threats or the obsessive thoughts of a dangerous person.
I want to physically restrict your movement.
Could this machine-assisted relationship really continue? What was he truly feeling about her? Is there some evil intent being accidentally revealed in his translated words? Was there real love? Some passion or desire hidden in those confusing, sterile and sometimes threatening exchanges they had?
You must remain in my visual range at all times.
It was becoming intolerable. She had to know what was really in his heart and how to let him show her. This frustration continued until their physical intimacy started to feel the effect. She just couldn't trust that there was still real love and caring from him. For her, even his touch had become as cold and loveless as his words. She couldn't stand it anymore. Stop it. Stop this. I want this to end. She yelled at him.
Xavier Green Paradise 332C looked deeply into his wife's eyes, searching for the love he never heard her speak. He always found it. Her words came to him through a system voice. The voice was a cold, monotone approximation of a woman. The translation was so instantaneous that it overlapped her voice, covering the sound and emotion in it. The system voice lacked any trace of affection. Still, he felt with certainty that she loved him. If he could just decode the hidden meaning of her sterile, loveless voice or strain beyond the artificial words to hear her real meaning. Regardless of the difficulty understanding her, he always told her what he was feeling whenever they were together. He had faith that somehow his meaning would survive the translation. I feel a deep and unending love for you, my dear, he told her. The absurd nature of their relationship added another level of intensity for him. It was like someone or something was trying to keep them apart. There was an enemy to oppose together that brought them even closer. A sinister force was interfering with their expressions of love and affection, making it even more necessary to break down that barrier. He was her noble knight, and their love needed to be rescued from the clutches of some malevolent force that had imprisoned it. This fantastic thought filled him with purpose and made him feel stronger for loving her. Let me hold you in my arms and never let you go, he said to her. With the certainty of their love, he became more playful with what he said to her, using her reaction as the only measure of how inaccurate the translation had become. He knew that this made him smile at her at inappropriate times. It could even make him laugh out loud when her reaction was so opposite of what he expected. Sometimes her response was so strong that the only thing he could do was hold her in his arms until she calmed down. Just looking at you is such happiness. Your beauty fills my eyes completely, he said. His confidence in their love could not be shaken. Even when their physical relationship began to change, he saw that as her wanting it to be more rare and precious. Maybe even playing hard to get with him.
Cease function. Halt all functions. Terminate all interaction.
The translation of her voice unexpectedly announced to him. Krista was sobbing uncontrollably.
Krista was sobbing uncontrollably. Xavier finally seemed to understand her completely. He looked startled and hurt by her outburst. Krista didn't know what she wanted to happen next, but for the first time her words had the desired effect. Through her tears she could see that he knew they were at a breaking point. He didn't smile and just seemed amused by the failure of their communication. He could see now the damage it was doing to her. There was genuine caring and concern in his eyes. He led her to the sofa and gently sat her down. Sitting next to her, he appeared mentally searching for something. An expression of happy inspiration appeared on his face and he gestured his visor open. After a few moments he swiped something to her visor and a notification appeared.
Join viewing of The Sands of Desire. Accept.
She glanced at the summary of the movie he was asking her to watch with him on a separate window in her visor. A young couple's love is threatened to be torn apart by their family's prejudices and the laws of their countries. The movie didn't sound very interesting, just a romantic melodrama. Then she noticed that it was made in his home country. There must be some reason he wanted her to see this. Wiping the last of the tears from her corners of her eyes, she gestured accept. She turned to look at the undecorated wall of their residence where they sometimes watched programs together. The movie appeared on this wall shown by a hidden projector. The reflected light was so beautiful and filled the whole room with warm colors. No visor image ever had the gentle, immersive quality of this kind of light. The beginning of the film was full of beautiful images of clear bright blue skies and golden sand dunes. She wondered if he had ever seen such amazing scenery himself or if his family only told him about it. Surprisingly, Xavier began to scan forward past all of the gorgeous landscape and color. He kept scanning, faster now, into the story. Subtitles flashed at a frantic pace on her visor at the bottom of the screen. There was no way to follow the story at this frenzied pace. Then the scanning suddenly stopped and the image of a young couple standing close together in an empty courtyard filled the screen. The young woman was holding her hands together with her fingers intertwined as if in prayer. The young man looked down at her hands and then up at her face and then deeply into her eyes. He placed his hands on hers. One on top and on underneath, covering them almost completely. The expression on his face as he looked at her was one of deep love, but also strength and determination. Her husband turned to Krista and gently holding her wrists he brought her hands together. She understood immediately what he was doing and interlaced her fingers. Xavier then placed his hands above and below hers, almost covering them completely. The look on his face was also of deep love and great strength. The young couple in the story was at risk of being torn apart and in this moment showed their willingness to stay together. She understood him completely. They sat together looking into each other's eyes without speaking for a long time. On the wall in front of them the drama of young love triumphed over the ignorance and prejudices of the past. Krista looked down at their hands. She smiled and gently withdrew hers from inside his, squeezing his hands for a moment before she let go. Then she gestured on her visor and the playback on the wall stopped. It was replaced by a different movie that looked much older. The silvery light of a black and white title screen filled the room. She swiped a message to her husband's visor.
Join viewing of The Love's Eternal Return. Accept.
The summary of the film appeared on Xavier's visor. A wife thought to be lost at sea when her ship disappears returns to her amazed husband. He gestures accept and the film begins to play and the room is filled with a swell of melodramatic orchestral music. The actors' names are listed on the screen one at a time. Krista begins to scan forward as the silvery images of a turbulent sea, paper telegrams and a funeral streak by in the wall. The scanning stops on the image of a door. A man appears on screen and opens the door. Standing there in the darkness of a rainy night is a woman. Without speaking he moves close to her, overcome with emotion. He raises his hands and gently places them on either side of her face, tenderly holding her head and looking into her eyes. No words. Just deep, thankful love and relief. Krista turns to her husband and places his hand on either side of her face. She looks at him with deep love and gratitude for his strength and confidence. Between his hands she feels like she has been rescued from the bottom of the sea. My vital systems would cease to function if you relocated somewhere else, she tells her husband. NMITY Stories. This story was brought to you by the NMITY Corporation and produced using licensed AI voice technology. For more stories, please visit nmitycorp.com or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform.